Welcome back to Inside Personal Growth. This is Greg Voice and the host of Inside Personal Growth. And Jan, as I do every time I do one of these shows, and I think my authors get sick of me saying it, but there wouldn't be a podcast after 15 years of still doing this if I didn't have listeners. And those listeners there's tons of them that are dedicated. For those of you who are new who found me, however you found me, thank you so much. And joining me from San Diego, just right down the street, well, maybe a little bit more down the street, but I'm in Encinitas, she's in San Diego, is Jan Phillips, a longtime friend who has written a new book called Still on Fire. And the subtitle is Field Notes from a Queer Mystic. And Jan, this is just a lovely book. It's a pleasure having you on. How are you doing?
I'm doing just great. I'm
Good.
thrilled to see you and be with you again. Thanks for the
Well,
invitation.
even if it's via Zoom, I mean, because it's been a while since we've actually sat down and had a cup of coffee, and that's what we should do next, or tea. But I'm going to let my listeners know something about you. Jan Phillips' quest has led her into and out of a religious community across the country on a Honda motorcycle and around the world on a one-woman peace pilgrimage. She's been a writer and a photographer since the mid-1970s, an artist in many arenas. Jan has 3 CDs of original music, a YouTube channel, a monthly newsletter, podcast and videos, and connects the dots of evolutionary creativity, spiritual intelligence, and social action. She is the author of 10 other books. And if you want to find out more about her books, just go to, it's very easy, janphillips.com. There you can actually see, I watched a TED Talk this morning. I didn't even know she was on TED. You can see that talk about creativity. But we're going to talk about this book. And I think more interestingly about this book and her journey is what every one of my listeners, I think, can learn from this book. Learn more importantly about spirituality, creativity, and life. And Jan, I don't know, I've known you for a long time. I've known you in the business world. I've known you in the personal world. I've seen how you've interacted with people and the creativity that you've brought to the table. And it has always impressed me, between the music, the poetry, the photography, the books, the things. You're somebody who's always in motion. And you've written many other books, like we said, and some of those were like business evolutionary books, right? They were very, very interesting. They were way ahead of their time, by the way. Had they come out now with this climate summit, I think we probably would have gotten a lot more juice from them. But this book, Still on Fire, is really kind of about you and your journey and your life. And why this book now? And just really why? What'd you want to let the world know?
Well, that's such a good question. All of my other books are nonfiction, which erupt out of some problem, right? And so if you see a problem, then you do your research and you write the book about it. But now I'm at a point in my life, I'm 72, and I thought, good time to write a memoir specifically called Field Notes from a Queer Mystic for 2 reasons. One is gay teens are in trouble. They're 4 times more apt to attempt suicide than regular straight teens are. And there's trouble in the gay community. There's just a lot of violence these days. And so I wanted to be totally out and to make it very clear on the cover of the book that this was for our tribe, for and about our community. The mystic piece is because, there's a massive exodus movement of people leaving the churches now because the churches are failing in integrity. They're failing to be inspiring, and people are just leaving the churches in droves. Many of them haven't ever teased apart religion, what we inherit, from our own spirituality what we create. And so I think there's a lot of people out there, particularly Catholics, who feel like they can't have a powerful spirituality because they're not associated with Catholicism anymore. So this book is for that community who wants to find out how to create a vital and inspired spiritual life for themselves, which will inform all their actions in the world. So it's a show by all of the experiences of one person who did it.
Well, and it took a lot of courage, to do the things you've done. And I think one of the things that you're bringing to your audience, your tribe, is the opportunity to be courageous. I know when people come out, that's a courageous act. Many people still hide behind that veil, and of being gay. I want you to tell us a little bit about your personal story. From a gay girl to becoming a nun in the convent to breaking free. I say breaking free because, religion versus spirituality versus faith, as you denote in the book, there's a huge difference. I always say religion did more to control people than it ever did to do anything else, versus spirituality helped people become free. It freed them. I mean, that's my personal compare and contrast.
That's good.
Yeah. What do you believe have been the significant turning points? And what would you tell our listeners that are contemplating their life's journey, whether they're gay or not, right, and embracing what's next? Because, with COVID, with the lockdown, with everybody rethinking their finitude. I've lost 2 brothers this year. I lost 2 good friends this year. You've got people leaving work in groves saying, I don't want to be at this place anymore because I don't have fulfillment. I don't have meaning. I don't have purpose in what I'm doing. And you're the perfect person to address this. So I know I packed a lot in that question, but there's 2 questions, really, probably 3. I want you to tell the people about your story of becoming a nun and then being dismissed. I read the damn letter that they sent to you, which was like, that was the lamest excuse I'd ever seen, to breaking free, and then helping people kind of embrace their spirituality and their creativity. What would you tell them?
Well, the backstory.
Yeah,
I discovered I was gay. There wasn't a word gay in the 60s when I discovered that I was homosexual. Nothing could be worse than to be a Catholic 12-year-old who falls in love with girls. Nothing could be worse. So I considered suicide because, as far as I knew from the whole Catholic Church, God doesn't like homosexuals. The church doesn't. The culture doesn't. Family doesn't. So I'll just kill myself. So I am pondering, how will I do this? And I'm in 6th grade, and the nun likes me. And she wonders, why am I walking around so sad and with my head down, all hunched over all the time? And she decides to do a campaign. She calls my mom. She says, your daughter, something's wrong with your daughter. We're going to bring her back to life. How do we do this? Well, I have a new idea. We're going to try positive reinforcement, which is just affirming the kid over and over whenever they do anything right. And the nun did it in spades. Every time she'd watch me on the playground, she'd say how good I was at capture the flag. Best speller in the class, writes so straight on the board, so smart, what an artist. First, I thought she was crazy, but after a month of this, it sunk in one day it happened that sad, sick little caterpillar woke up a butterfly. And when that happened, I immediately became a leader. I immediately stopped thinking suicidal thoughts. And I immediately decided I'm going to be a nun when I grow up because nuns save kids' lives. So that was the weird reason why I went into the convent, to save other kids' lives. And I had to wait 6 years because I was 12 when that happened. So I stayed I loved it in the convent because I didn't pay any attention to rules that I didn't want to pay attention to. So I just took a lot of freedom to be me. But they found out that I was gay, that I was in love with a novice, that I had snuck into her bedroom. It was a disaster because even though they're always afraid of a carnal relationship, never did anything more than kiss. Nothing sexual ever happened, but they had such fear about those kinds of relationships. So they sent me home. Worst thing that ever happened to me. And it began a 20-year downward spiral.
I have a question for you. I'll impose it here. I'll insert it. Do you ever watch Grant Chester?
I have seen it once. So
Leonard is the guy, it's the gay guy who they catch in the 50s and put him in prison in England for being gay, but he is the vicar's assistant or what, a curer, whatever they call them.
Yes.
And it's, you know, you get to look back in time and you say, how ignorant could people be? You know, he went before a judge and a trial and a jury and the whole 9 yards, and they threw him in jail. All I can say to my listeners, if you haven't seen Grant Chester, PBS, it's the best. And what Jan is talking about, she isn't just saying, hey, this happened once. This happened so much back then that it was almost a crime. You know, I'm sorry if I sidetracked you, but
no, you didn't sidetrack me. So it happened in a college class I took too. The expression of homophobia was my professor, the class was how do you create a 2-slide projector show where the images dissolve and there's a soundtrack of music to create a more emotional impact. This is before computers and before PowerPoints, right? Mm-hmm. So everyone is using slide projectors. And so I came out and I did a slideshow called Woman to Woman. And it had images of lesbians, but it was about as many images as how we are in the culture. I don't know, 10%. It wasn't all that. And there was no eroticism or anything. It was just, there was a picture of a woman on a motorcycle with a t-shirt that said, I love younger women. That's just, you know, kind of the extent of it. Or, you know, a button that says, I'm a dyke. It was just nothing. But he was disgusted with the whole thing, said he was giving me an F. A few people in the class shunned me. And I went right over to, that's when the day I came out as an activist, I went right over to the human sexuality professor because I knew he always brought marginalized people into his classes to talk to the classes. I said, I want to talk to your class about being a lesbian and getting bad treatment from people for no reason at all. So he let me talk to the class, and that was my coming out as a social activist.
Interesting, you know, because I had a class at San Diego State in the 70s, and even in the 70s, I remember it was a class on sexuality, and it was jam full, and they would bring in marginalized people, as you said. They'd either bring in couples that were swingers, or they'd bring in gay men or lesbian women or whatever they had, you know. But the reason the class was packed is because everybody was so interested. People were hanging out the doors. I mean, it was probably one of the most fun classes. And then afterwards, we all went to a bar and talked. And it, you know, that was the way it was.
That was the way. Cool. That's what we did.
So what would you tell the listeners in some way from this experience, because it had its pain and it's had its joys? You know, you had a partner, you lost her to cancer. You know, I have had an older brother who died 2 years ago, and he was gay all of his life. He died at 77. And he said, you know, and he lived in the same times you did. I mean, it was pretty much identical. And he said there was nothing worse than being a gay man. He said, I wouldn't wish this on anybody. What happened to him, you look at his journey, meaning that he didn't find that much happiness as a result of it. And I guess my question to you would be, in all of this journey that you've been from being a nun to me reading that letter in the book about what she said, I actually even quoted it somewhere in these questions, because I just was appalled at the letter, and it said Occidental California. I was like, where's Occidental? That must have been LA, right? I was just thinking to myself.
No, it's up north, Sonoma County.
Is that where it is? I didn't even know
Country.
where Occidental was. I saw the letter Occidental. I was like, Occidental? I know there's an Occidental College. I didn't know there was Occidental. But what would you tell our listeners about this journey, about becoming an activist? Like you just said, that was the day I became an activist. You made a decision in your life, and I think there becomes a turning point where people say there's so much pain, I'm going to do something to change.
Yes, that's it. And I could not heal my heart. I lived for a couple years every day going to the mailbox thinking, maybe today I'll get the letter saying they made a terrible mistake. I was just like living with a delusion that they had just made a terrible mistake because I was destined to be in a religious community. So I couldn't heal my heart. And I tried therapy never worked. Years go by, and I'm just, how it translated through my body was I had so much rage, I had so much shame, I had so much pain. So not knowing what to do, how I couldn't turn it around, I just started drinking a lot. I started doing drugs. I started being kind of promiscuous, not able to have a committed relationship, because at any moment of the day, somebody can pull the rug out from under you. So it undermined all my natural instincts to trust people. It was terrible. And that went on for 20 years until I had an occasion to sit down with the woman who was the provincial director of the community. It was a mother house with 400 sisters in it. The head honcho of the mother house agreed to sit down with me to help me process it, because I said to her, I can't heal, and it's been 20 years. Since she was generous, she goes, yes, come to my convent. She had rotated out of leadership. Go to the convent, tell her the whole story. My hope is if I have her as a witness, something might change. And something changed indeed. And I don't know why, but I started the story when I was 12, talked to her about, the whole night of being kicked out, how terrible that was, what's happened to me since then. And when I was done, she called me sister. She said, sister, will you forgive me for this terrible injustice that happened to you on my watch? Kind of surprised me, because I wasn't there with the agenda called, they better figure out how to ask me for my forgiveness. I didn't even occur to me. And then I said, yeah. I said, of course, I forgive you. And then she said, will you forgive the entire community of the Sisters of St. Joseph? Yes, I said, of course. I forgive the entire community of the Sisters of St. Joseph of Carondelet for this terrible injustice that was done to me. And the minute I uttered those words, some kind of miracle happened, and my brain took a turn, and I hear this voice says, nothing to forgive. And the next thing that occurred to me was, I said to her, oh my God, there's nothing to forgive. I said, I should be thanking you for the privilege that you gave me to spend 2 years in a monastic environment. So in my brain, the whole thing got turned around, and I don't know what that forgiveness thing had to do with it.
Well, it sounds like you went through the rage process. In other words, when people get angry, you said, hey, I went and did drugs, I was promiscuous, I did this. That was kind of the rage part that you got through. Then when you went back to see her after that, is that correct?
Yeah, after that.
Way after that. And you got her forgiveness, something triggered in your mind. That
I didn't get her forgiveness. I forgave her.
well, ultimately, but she said, will you forgive? What I heard you say was, will you forgive me and us, the rest of them in
Yes.
order? And you
Yes.
said, you don't need to. I forgive you. Is that right?
At first I said, I forgive you. And then the voice from the cosmos says, there's nothing to forgive.
Well,
They
that's the
gave you
spirituality and not the religion. That's the soul and not the ego.
That is.
And, you got to a point. I just had an interview with Gary Zukav, Universal Human. And, our true power is that power from the soul. Yet we frequently get tied up in the ego and think that's so important to, have that. No, we all have them. The question is how much are they impeding our growth? And can you recognize that? And, your spiritual journey, as you said, has been interesting. You've been from embracing Catholicism to touching Buddhism to touching all these other things that you explored. You've explored a lot. And you cite this Niels Bohr. I'd never heard of him before. And there was a great quote: opposite a truth statement is a false statement. But opposite a profound truth is another profound truth. You found the truth. What significant meaning does that quote have for you? And how might our listeners relate to that as well?
Well, Niels Bohr is a physicist, and the world of physics is open. It's kind of opening up. The science of physics is opening up our minds to the most incredible truths, because it borders on metaphysics, right? So physics leads to metaphysics. And so what he said is, opposite a true statement is a false statement. In this realm where we live, in the realm of the relative, it's true. It's raining out or it's not raining, right? It's either true or false, whatever you're saying.
Mm-hmm.
You can defend it because you can see it, feel it, etc. But in the realm of the absolute, which is the dimension beyond us, the dimension of divinity, the absolute realms, there's no good and evil. There's no duality. Opposite of profound truth is another profound
truth.
So yeah. I could say, from this higher perspective, being dismissed from the convent was the worst thing that ever happened to me. Being dismissed from the convent was the best thing that ever happened to me. They're both profoundly true.
That is what I wanted the listeners to hear. Because frequently when something goes away that we think we should have, we get attached to it. So it's non-attachment to what that is in our mind, to what we think it was supposed to be. And for you, the supposed to be was, I was supposed to stay in the convent. And the truth was you weren't. Right. And you were supposed to become Jan. The truth is, that is the truth. Now, a question, because so many listeners are active on social media, and the divisiveness that occurs as a result of people putting stories out, including our media. And this wasn't one of our questions, but I have this for you. And how you said right first off that the gay community is hurting. That was one of your first statements. There's a lot of anger. And this is being proliferated by false stories. False stories that are all over the place. All you got to do is go on the internet and you start to see them. And these false stories have been exacerbated lately. In your mind, to bring, look, they said there's either fear or love, two big emotions. How would you bring love back to this community that you say is hurting so much?
Well, it's kind of a tricky question. I mean, writing this memoir and telling the whole story of being queer all my life and the consequences of that is one way to do it, right? I created a whole photo exhibition called Born Gay with that was up for a month in Hillcrest at the Living Room Coffee House. And it's big images of me all through my life from age 3, kindergarten, 3rd grade. And it tells the whole story about how did I know I was born gay, what it felt like, how come I had to have a fake boyfriend, all the ways I lied and tried to say I am not that, how it backfires on us. So I think the best we can do is to just come out and tell our own stories. But the problem is, see, I have nothing to fear and nothing to lose. I had lost everything. So there was nobody could get at me now. I lost my church, my community. I lost my family for a little while. So what else can they take from me? I have nothing to lose. But I'm in alignment. I'm in community with women who could lose their children in a custody case. So me being out, no consequences. You can't hurt my feelings, right? But my sister being out, they could take her kids away. So we really have to face up with what's the real ramifications. But look what they're doing to Pete Buttigieg now.
Yeah.
Making fun of him for taking paternity leave. I just read today a little trans kid in grammar school. The boys put up a camera. They hid a camera in the bathroom to see how the kid went to the bathroom as a trans person, and then they posted it online. That kind of baloney. They're throwing us off buildings in the Middle East. They're killing people outright in the streets in Africa because our missionaries go over there and say homosexuality is a terrible sin and a crime. It goes on everywhere all around us. Every one of us who is queer has to deal with how am I going to be? And I just say the most freedom comes for us and to us and through us when we acknowledge, yes, I am that.
I would say that, and that's true with anything that you are, is to claim it and not dance around it. And I think that's an important message here. It's an important message in the book. And whether it's bravery or courage or whatever you want to call it. And, you speak about being a nun, which we're and I say, in the hypocrisy of the Catholic Church. What would you tell the listeners about finding their bliss and what risks you had to take to ultimately find yours? And speak about the journey that you call it from religion to faith, if you would. Because
go ahead.
Go ahead.
I didn't realize how to find my bliss until I'm sitting there in a mess going, when was I blissful? And the truth was, I was blissful for the most part in the convent. And the reason was because when you're in the novitiate, it's like boot camp. When you're in boot camp for any of the armed forces, they control your time, right? 5 o'clock, get up. 6 o'clock, do that. 8 o'clock, do this, right? Well, so it's like that in the convent. Only they pretty much divvied up the day into 4 parts: prayer, solitude, community, and service. And when I put all those pieces together, I said, oh my heavens, I could create a life that has equal parts of service to others, community, prayer, and silence. And so once I got that, that's how I created my life.
And you didn't need someone else to do that for you. Anybody listening out there can do that. So
right, because we're in charge of our time.
It's
a matter of how you apportion your time.
Yeah.
That's why I think you mentioned this earlier, Greg, but that's why I think so many people have quit their jobs and they're not going back because they discovered when they create their own days, yes, you have to put in the work part, but you can also consciously create it. So you have time for meditation, time to be with other people socially. You figure out what your service is, right? So we have this COVID thing has been the worst thing and the best thing that ever happened to the human species.
I agree. I agree. And it's giving us time. I think you said in your speech to them about creativity, we're going to change out our RAM. We're going to actually the mental
upgrade
part of
our
it. We're going to
software.
upgrade our software. And I think that's important. And you state that you were running toward a good life, but that you were running away at the same time from a culture that shamed you, a family that might not accept you, in a world that didn't seem to have a place for you. It was interesting. Your mother was Catholic, your father wasn't Catholic. So it was what does the lesbian woman inside of you want to say about being accepted? And what would you advise any other gay women listening to be accepted?
Well, I think it's really important to create for ourselves our own family of choice, to prepare ourselves to, I still have my family. I still go to family reunions. I visit my brother occasionally, though he's a Trump supporter and it's become more difficult now. But I have another family of people who will never let me down. And they are my community, and they're all over the country. But that's an essential thing for those of us whose lives are at risk. And I'm not worried about somebody coming up and killing me for being queer, although somebody might. I'm not worried about that, but I know that I have a community of support. And I think that's like somebody might be sitting in some podunk town in Nebraska or in the middle of Kansas right now and not be out and not be proud and not know how to find community. I think they should go to janphillips.com and get a consult with me.
I'd agree.
Because there's a lot, we're not going to spend a lot of time here on me giving you steps 1 through 5. But the thing I know is that we have to figure out how to create a circle around ourselves. And it sometimes starts with book clubs. Sometimes helps to have social media, but everybody's story is so different.
Well, you travel around the country speaking and doing community and have built community everywhere. And if they go to your website, they certainly can find out where you're going to be next. And in spite of COVID, Jan still forges on, masks or no masks. In this case, probably masked. But, do look for, she's right. Go to janphillips.com, janphillips.com, and send her an email. Say, hey, I'd like to talk to you, because this is going to reach a lot of people. And I'm hoping it has a very positive element that people hear through this who would like to get in touch with you. Now, in the 60s, you had the software of Catholicism installed, you said. As you wrote in the book, what was it like living with a mother that was Catholic? And you said there were 13 of you, is that right?
My mom was one of 14.
One of 14. And a father who did not follow the religion, but your mother won and influenced your programming. And why do you believe you bought in lock, stock, and barrel? What is it that you think, if you think back then, we're very young. We're very impressionable. I actually, I'll say this, when I was interviewing Gary Zukoff, he said, do you remember when you were in your backyard and there was a sandbox and there were fences around it? He says, you had never taken the fences down. And in your case, in anybody's case, being that young, you're so influenced, you don't recognize there's something beyond the fences, right? I think that's a really great analogy. We don't recognize there's something beyond the fences, and we're frequently stuck in the fences in the same sandbox doing the same thing. Why do you think you bought into it lock, stock, and barrel so much?
Well, for one, the Catholic Church is a master at programming, because they do it with, let's just say, I'll say 3 words: frankincense,
Yeah.
candles, colored vestments, ever changing, hallelujah chorus. That'll do it.
So that's what got you to change. Okay, so look, after you were dismissed, you got in, you were in a couple of years, you were dismissed, and you wrote this letter to Sister Joan Teresa, right?
Yeah.
And you wanted to find out why you were dismissed. And you talked a little bit about this, but the reason stated was in the letter, a disposition unsuited to religious life with excessive and exclusive friendships, quote unquote. She claimed she didn't have the file or whatever.
It was short.
Yeah. So what was it like dealing with the dismissal, and how did you deal with this? And you've actually already said how you kind of went back and asked her, but mentally at the time, Jan Phillips sitting there getting this letter, were you raged? Enraged?
I felt bad that they never got me, because I told you, I think they had a very it was called particular friendships, and we shortened it to PFs, and we made jokes about it. And if you have somebody you're really strongly fond of and there's any emotional quality, she'd be your PF.
Okay.
But that's why she said, relationship, particular friendships.
Yeah.
And so I had 2, I wrote about the 2 in the book, and that just, it scared them. And so I thought, they think I'm unsuitable for religious life because I love people.
Yeah.
And they say I'm excessive and exclusive. Well, excessive, yes. Exclusive, no. So I said, they don't even know who they're dealing with here. But it still didn't make me feel better, because I still had no power in the matter. And I was still turning the whole thing into a country western tune called They Done Me Wrong. Because that was 1977. That was only midway through my healing journey, which took me into 1990.
Yeah.
So,
well, the book is a great memoir for people to read, to understand what you went through, and to then relate that to things they might be going through in their life where they're having similar reactions to it, and how they can learn to let go, how you learn to let go of that and to forgive, and maybe never forget, but to forgive. And Jan, you said that Ken Keyes Jr. wrote a book entitled The 100th Monkey. What impact did this book have on your life, and how did it turn your life upside down, as you stated in the book?
I was working as a picture framer in a suburban mall outside Syracuse, New York. I go to work one day, and on my workbench is a book called The 100th Monkey. I took it with me on my lunch hour and read the whole thing while I was eating my sandwich. And I discovered I could be the 100th person. I don't think we have time to go into the story, but anyone could Google it and get the story. But I proclaimed in the middle of the restaurant, oh my God, I could be the 100th person, because it's about changing consciousness, not through words and language, but through intention and thoughts and action. And that was the day I decided to make a peace pilgrimage around the world. So I left the restaurant, went over to the bank, give the teller $20 and say to her, I'm going to make a peace pilgrimage around the world as soon as I get $5,000 in the savings account. And I'm going to do it as fast as I can. And then I had to go to work, finish my picture framing job. But
Hmm.
while I was there, I created like a 75-word ad for the Penny Saver that said, we'll do the following tasks, paint your house, clean out your attic, wash your windows, da, 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 da. And then I started getting jobs. And then I also became a waitress for Howard Johnson, went to work at 5 a.m. I also became a dishwasher at a restaurant, washed dishes until midnight. So I worked really hard for a year and a half, got my $5,000, bought 200 rolls of film, 200 Kodak mailers for my slides. And that's how the whole thing happened.
Started. Yeah.
Because of the 100th monkey.
Well, it was certainly the thing that got you on fire, and still on fire.
Still on fire.
Now, you state that the God you once related to has gone away of the wild goose. Okay, the God you once related to. That doesn't mean you don't believe in God. It just means the God that you had formed in your life as being part of a nun and living the religious life versus the spiritual. But the time that you spent in prayer and meditation only increases every day, today, tomorrow, what you do. How has your relationship with God morphed, and what makes it better now than it was in the past?
So I no longer have an image, the Sistine Chapel image of that bearded God reaching out and touching and creating Adam. That is the image that's gone the way of the wild goose. I have also studied Bishop John Shelby Spong, who's a biblical scholar, and studied the text and have no longer look to scripture because it's so much of it is suspect through all the translations, through the patriarchy, through all the agendas of all the people. It was original Aramaic, and then it gets translated into Latin by male priests, and then it gets translated into Greek, and then it gets translated into Old English, right? It's just, how can anything stay the same? So I don't count on those scriptures being necessarily true.
Being the truth.
Being the truth.
Right? The truth, meaning with a capital T.
So every morning in my practice, I light 2 candles and I recreate fresh every day. Who is this God people talk about? And it's just gotten down to that force is the source of this creation. It's more like a verb. It's ongoing. It's the wave, and I'm the particle. It's one energy, and energy either takes the form of a wave or a particle based on who's looking. And so I know I'm the particle version, and I know the invisible one is the wave version, but that's in my lungs, in my bloodstream, the air that I breathe, the sea that I swim in. That is divine mind to me.
Well,
I think of divine mind.
I like your analogy because I go to listen to the monks at SRF, and I'm a devotee, and they always say there's the drop and the sea. And we are drops in the sea of the total, right? Yes. Of the whole. Yes. And, it is, that's the way really to look at it. If you were to leave these listeners with 3 key takeaways from the book, what would they be? And what would you say to encourage our listeners to embrace this God energy? In other words, the energy, not the religion, the fact that it is part of us. We are all God in our own right. We are those particles as part of the whole, right? We're all interconnected. What would you tell them about your journey, having been separated, saying, oh no, God is up there, right? Because that's the way you were, the right. 2 fingers doing this, versus no, God is in here, And I am that. I think there's still people making that journey, Jan, lots of them.
Emily Dickinson once said, "The only news I get is bulletins all day from immortality." And when I think of God as supreme intelligence, I think of God as broadcasting intelligence throughout the cosmos, every minute of the day. And so, how do I get my messages, right? I sit there in silence and say, I'm here, I'm listening, I'm in your presence. I don't have a puppy there. I don't have other people there. I'm not playing my playlists. I'm in silence. I have a candle burning and I sit there for a designated period of time. That is a requirement to be in relationship with divine mind. Imagine falling in love with someone. You know the feeling. Think of being in love with. I have driven through blizzards to spend a night with someone I love. I have risked my life to be in the arms of the beloved. Now, if you're in love with somebody, when they call and say, how do we get together? You do not say, I don't have time. Because all you want to do is be in the arms of your beloved. So the critical requirement, you can do it 10 minutes a day. I guarantee you'll up your game. If you commit to 10 minutes a day, every day, to sit in silence, put your phone somewhere else, don't read the newspaper, don't have any temptations around you to take your attention. Just sit there quietly. You will be communicated to. All my CDs are songs that I wrote as a result of the communications I received in my meditation time. Every song comes from the outside in. So if I would say to your listeners, if you want an inspired life, take a listen every day to the boss of inspiration, to the supreme source of your life. Tune in and realize that everything, this goes back to opposite of truth is of untruth, opposite of profound statement is other profound statement. This is also true. Everything that has happened to you, it could be the best thing and it could be the worst thing, but it has happened to you, it has happened for you, and it has happened through you. That you co-created every disaster, every trauma, and every tragedy in your life. You had something to do with that being in your sphere, because we are creative people. It has happened for you as well as to you. And that we have to process the events of our lives, keep spinning them until we come to the point where we finally get it and say, thank you for that occurrence. You know, you say to somebody, what's the worst thing that ever happened to you? My divorce from my first husband. What's the best thing that ever happened to you? My divorce from my first husband. Right? Because they have processed it. Right? And now they're going, thank God I divorced my first husband.
I always love what Byron Katie used to say, to say, is it true? Is it really true? Right? Meaning, because, we live in a world of making stuff up, then believing what we made up, and then living the story that we made up.
Right.
And you don't have to believe everything you think. And so, you're walking around having this thought about what was the worst thing that ever happened. And that's really, in essence, what you have had happen, is you start to question your thinking. But then when you get in touch with a true higher source, call it God, power, the omnipotent, whatever, you find that you will shift so much because you have a love relationship with God. or a higher power, knowing that every day, that's what you said, I'm seeking to have this connection because that's where I get my sustenance from. I get my sustenance, I get my creativity, I get everything I need. For my listeners, go out and get a copy of this, Still on Fire. You're going to be on fire after you read it because you're going to want to do something in your life and change something from this memoir. Jan, it's been a pleasure having you on Inside Personal Growth, sharing some of your stories and your experiences, because that's how we all learn. In the community, we hear other people. They can go to your website at janphillips.com. We'll put a link in there. We'll also have a link to the book on Amazon as well. Do follow Jan. She's got a newsletter. She's got a lot of things that you could sign up for, but an opportunity to explore new horizons. That's what I'll say. Jan, thanks so much for being on the show.
Greg, thanks. You're great. We love you.
Take care. Thank you for listening to this podcast on Inside Personal Growth. We appreciate your support. And for more information about new podcasts, please go to insidepersonalgrowth.com or any of your favorite channels to listen to our podcast. Thanks again, and have a wonderful day.